The playoffs have finally arrived. Let's take a look at who's playing who and how it's going to shake out on this bonus episode of the AL Report podcast. I'm back for another bonus episode for the postseason. Unfortunately, Ryan's not going to be joining us today, but that does not mean that we're not going to look at some playoff matches. We have 8 of them to look at. Hopefully, we will look at them in a thorough manner that doesn't drag. And it has been a pretty good season in both leagues. We have some really good matchups, some less interesting matchups, and overall, as a whole, we've had a good 2025 season that have led to this moment for the American Association and the Frontier League. We're going to dive in. We're going to preview each of these matchups and hopefully have this episode up before our first pitch tonight, which I believe our first game that's going to get going is Tri-City and Sussex County at 6:30 at Joe Bruno Stadium in Troy, New York. That, of course, being said, we're going to start in the association. We'll work our way to those Frontier League games in just a little bit. And we're going to start with some of the more interesting matchups here with the Sioux City Derby, as it would appear to be, the Battle of the Sioux, if you would. And then we will move on from there. If you want more information on the individual teams, we have a couple videos that just went up in the last 24 hours on the YouTube channel. You could take a look at that. Deeper dive on each of the individual teams, the playoff bracket, playoff format, and all like that. They're just 13 minutes apiece, so pretty quick and easy to get through. And the best part is, they're mostly audio-based, so you could just throw that on and listen to it. Getting into the meat of this now. Explorers, Canaries, they're going to square off. Explorers, a 63-36 record. The Canaries, 57-42. Keep in mind, I did these the day before the season ended. So if their records are off by 1, and those overall stats are going to be slightly off, but the rankings are going to be right, and just about everything there will be essentially correct. For what we're doing, it's going to be more than good enough. When these two teams squared off in the regular season, the Explorers walked away 8-7 against them. It was a really back and forth affair between the two, and they are essentially polar opposites. You have a Explorers team that is pretty middle of the pack when it comes to just about everything on offense, with the lone exception, of course, being the stolen bases that they set. I'm pretty confident an independent baseball record with 271 in 100 games. Or that was their 99 game total. They probably tacked on a few more in that last game. But regardless, still, over 270 steals in nearly 100 games is just crazy to even think about. However, they don't really do much else. They're not going to hit for power. That much is for certain. They are pretty middle of the pack when it comes to drawing walks or just getting on base in general. So that's something that has concerned me on that front there. Meanwhile, Sioux Falls definitely is an offensive team. For as good of a team as they are on offense, they are as bad of one on defense, and the same could be said of the Explorers. For as bad as they are on offense, they are as good on the pitching side of the ball. Now, that of course being said, I do like the matchup here as a whole for the Explorers, if for no other reason than this is a team that gets to go into a more offensive-friendly environment in the Birdcage for Game 1, after which they will get to go back home to their own confines. That confines is going to start to drag down that Canary offense a little bit, while that Birdcage environment is going to try to lift up their own offensive ability. And if you look at the total runs scored, there's 70 runs separating the two. So it's not the giant chasm you might expect. And in fact, the Explorers are only about 5 runs off from being a top 4 team when it comes to runs scored, which I think a lot of baseball folk would argue is the most important offensive category, since it's a game of runs and outs. And I do think you're going to see a kind of explosive back and forth between these two. I am deeply concerned about Sioux Falls. Do I think that their pitching numbers are true to form? Probably not. Again, offensive environment in the cage. in a 1v1 here, a near full run difference on the ERA tells me it's more than just the birdcage environment here. I chalked it up to even a half run. There's still a big gap between them and Sioux City. That's going to be a net neutral. I think that gap between the pitching is wider than the gap between the hitting. So in the end, where I'm looking with this matchup, I'm kind of leaning more Explorers based on it. I think Sioux Falls could absolutely steal a game, but in the end, Sioux City, I think, winds up taking this series in 3 games. I do think the Canaries will push them, and I do think we're going to get an exciting back and forth. I just think in the end, the Explorers are just too strong of a team for the Canaries to fight back against, and this is definitely a departure from how I normally view these types of series, where I'll lean more on the offensive team than the pitching team, but I think the gaps are in such a way as that that's an irrelevant point at this stage. Looking at the Kansas City Monarch and Fargo Moorhead Red Hawk matchup here, Monarchs 58-41, Red Hawks 55-44. Pretty close, pretty even. Kansas City gets the home field. They'll go up to Fargo before having to go on a long bus trip back to KCK. Fairly comparable teams here, pitching-wise. Red Hawks, better team, but not by that much. They're separated by about half a run a game there. Park factor being about even there as well. Same amount of walks, essentially. Fewer hits, certainly, for the Red Hawks there. More strikeouts, though, for Kansas City. It's a real back and forth affair on that one. Whips are practically identical, 1-3 versus 1-3-1 there. So pitching, I would call it a stalemate. Now, granted, Kansas City is without Julian Garcia after he had been picked up, I believe, by the Cardinal organization. But regardless of who picked him up, he's not a Monarch anymore, and that's definitely going to be a big dent in the pitching rotation at a critical time of the year. Flipping on the offensive side of things here, the Red Hawks just haven't really gotten their offense going all year. 7th or 8th in most major category. Runs scored is 9th. There is nearly 40 runs difference there, almost 50 runs difference. So that is something to watch out for. It's one thing when you have 2 teams above 500 runs. The Red Hawks are not even above 470, so that's a concern there. They don't really get on base much. They don't really have much power in the lineup. Dylan Thomas is really the guy you got to look for that. They try to make a move to get Osberg in, but that clearly hasn't quite worked itself out yet. Fernandez is also a guy that could do something, but overall, not really a team that's going to get on base, and not really a team that's going to drive in a lot of runs. Likewise, their peaks and their valleys kind of almost are inverted from each other. Kansas City started hot and finished hot. Fargo started slow and finished slow. In a best-of-3 series, that definitely does matter. I will say Fargo does have the season series, 9-5. So that is something to watch out for. However, in the end, I do think the Monarchs are a better team. I think they're a more well-rounded team. And I do think that we're going to wind up seeing the Explorers and the Monarchs squaring off against each other in what will be a very entertaining battle. But in the meanwhile, just looking at these first-round matchups for now, I do lean on the side of Kansas City. I think quality of roster, it's very even. I think the pitching's generally a wash. And I do think that the offense from Kansas City is going to carry them over the Red Hawks. The one thing I will say is Jake Dykhoff's obviously going to get at least one start. My guess would be game 1 in front of a home crowd is where he's going to get it. But that I still have to see. The other two, once you go back to Kansas City up 1-0, you really just need to get lucky once. And so that is something that we're going to have to see. If the Monarchs can beat up on Dykhoff, then, I mean, it's game, set, match in my eyes. You just beat up the best pitcher in the American Association this year. And I don't think there's going to be much else that's going to present a challenge here. But that's not to say there's not quality players. There's definitely some really good pitchers on that Fargo team, especially in the bullpen. But if you can beat up the best pitcher, then what's the second best pitcher going to do? So I'm going to say we're going to get another best-of-3 that goes the distance. I'm going to say Fargo is going to drop probably games 2 and 3. I like them to win game 1, but in the end, Kansas City in 3 is the way I'm looking at that. We go down to the East Division that if you've listened all year long and if you listen to the videos we put out, you'll know much maligned is the way to describe this division. We have Lake Country and Chicago, the 1 and the 2. Lake Country sitting comfortably at 54 and 45. Chicago at 50 and 48. We have 2 teams here that are honestly more even than you would expect. Pretty middle of the pack batting team for Lake Country, but also middle to upper middle of the pack when it comes to pitching. Then you have middle of the pack pitching with Chicago with an upper middle of the pack batting team. They do have a lot of total bases. They do slug very well. They do get on base. They hit for a high average, which a batting average enthusiast such as myself does enjoy. However, as a group, there's something about them that just isn't doing it. And getting rid of Bell is not the kind of thing you want to see right before a playoff series here. There are still pieces here. Chance Sisco's probably the most notable of them all. But as a unit, to weaken yourself like that going into a postseason run is concerning to me. I also do question the depth in the pitching position, but I suppose there's a fair counter argument, and nobody's really deep at pitching at this point in the year. So there's that give and take. Lake Country, my bigger concern for them is less that, they are a good pitching team, about a 4 ERA, which is nice to see, and they don't really allow a lot of walks. They don't really do a lot of hits either. My bigger concern from even just the batting side of things is just that they're really cold right now. I mean, they got a couple wins on the dying days of the season, but they had a 9-game slump. They haven't looked really good all month, and they haven't been outstanding all year long. I mean, there's a reason why, if you look at the top 10 polls, that we never really ranked them. Nobody really put them in there. There was a couple weeks where they appear towards the bottom of the ranking, but then they shortly disappear afterwards. They're not really an overly impressive team. And it's not even like a yeoman type situation where they're not impressive, they're not flashy to go to work, they do their job and they go home. It's not even really that. It's just you can't really tell their quality when most of their games are spent beating up a bunch of lesser teams. And it's not even a situation in the West where you can say, oh, well, Sioux City won games by beating teams worse than them. Yeah, but I mean, there's 3 teams in that division outside of them that are extremely talented and very good. And even then, they still have to cross over and play some teams in the East as well. So I can't really tell what to make of the Doghounds. I want to be more optimistic about them. I want to be more positive about them, but they're not really giving me a whole lot to work with on that front. Chicago, on the flip side, I think is a pretty mediocre team. This is a situation where the record tells them what they are. And if they can find some luck, because keep in mind, they did have a couple stretches in the season, about a pair of 2-week stretches where they were really hot and they did really well. And I think that seems more the aberration than what we've seen outside of it. That being said, if they can find another 2-week heater, that wins them a championship. So get all that on the table. A 12-6 record versus Chicago this year for the Doghounds. That aside, I'm going to say Chicago. I think Chicago in 2, our first real upset of the day. And of this round, I like that solely based off of how hot or cold you are. And in a best of 3, I think that matters a lot more than another series. If it was a best of 5, I might be tempted to go Lake Country in that. But ultimately, I think Chicago's going to be able to win one at home. And I think they're going to win the next one on the road to secure it. Looking at the final series in the association, we have Kane County at 48 and 51 taking on a Milwaukee team that is 45 and 54. Milwaukee team had to get extremely hot just to make the postseason and get a lot of luck with Cleburne falling just short here. And to a degree, I think Gary not firing their manager earlier than they should have also stopped them from making the postseason. However, we're not talking about teams that didn't make it. We're talking about the teams that did. And we have 2 teams that are really kind of hard to gauge here. I do believe the Kane County record is what it is. I think their numbers are trustworthy. It's the Milwaukee one I'm not totally sold on, because these are taking the whole season and not this hot run. And I'm a lot more forgiving on Milwaukee than I am on other teams that did similar runs like this, just because watching them beat teams that they're going to have to play in the postseason, teams that were very much still alive in the race as well, does a lot of work for me. This is also a team that lost their big piece in Osterberg, and if anything, got better. So that is a very interesting development for me as well. I still don't think their pitching depth is very good. Hot or not hot, a 5 ERA is a 5 ERA. Hot or not hot, only striking out 750 guys is only striking 750 out, although admittedly, it's only about 15 less than what their opponent's doing in this series. They're still pretty comparable in a lot of categories to Kane County. The one major difference being that Kane County doesn't allow a lot of hits, while Milwaukee does. Nearly 250 more hits from the Milkmen this past year, and those hits translate to runs. Offensively speaking, they're pretty comparable. The major difference is the slugging. Milwaukee is a slightly better batting team, slightly worse pitching team. I think ultimately what this series is going to come down to is if Kane can keep the bats under control for Milwaukee, they're going to win this. If they let guys get on base, then it can be a problem, whether that's walk or hit, probably leaning more walk, just looking at the general numbers. But if those guys do get on base, then it can be a problem. Milwaukee is prone to hit for some power. So one mistake pitch is all it could take to end your season. Just judging off of what I'm seeing here, I think Milwaukee won taking this one 2-0. Milwaukee also took the season series 7-5. It's not that I don't necessarily believe in Kane. It's just I think hot teams do well in short series. So you've probably been able to tell from this point. And as a result, I do lean the Milkmen in this contest. So we shall see. Milkmen versus Dogs could be a very interesting second round matchup. And who's to say that we don't get a Milkmen and Explorers final for whatever that might be worth. However, we look at the Frontier League now, and it starts with Schaumburg, a 58-38 team, taking on Lake Erie, a 52-42 team. This is one where these numbers and all that are complete. They were done after the regular season ended, so that's all well and good. Regular season match between Lake Erie and Schaumburg, 8-1 in favor of Schaumburg. Also, this is kind of the same old story with Lake Erie. Very good pitching team. Sub 4 ERA, sub 1.4 WHIP, almost 800 Ks, fewer than 750 hits allowed. They do walk a lot of guys, but that's a strikeout team issue. You know, if the ball's not working that way today, then it's just not gonna hunt. 11 shutouts though. But again, we go back to the issue with the batting, which is nothing above 10th. Not steals, not total bases, not runs, nothing on the slash line. It's just not a team that's capable of hitting. And you're going up against one of the better hitting teams in the league in Schaumburg. That's tied for second batting average, tied for second on base, best slugging team. They don't steal bags, but that's because you hit well. If you're hitting well, why risk losing a base runner, especially when you're a top slugging team? If you're going to get an extra base hit, a stupid amount of the time, then why would you risk taking guys off the pond for that? Also, over 1,500 total bases on the year and nearly 700 runs scored on the year as well. This is kind of a situation in the best of three. I lean Schaumburg. I don't even think park factor really matters all that much, to be honest. And we could look at the Schaumburg pitching, which generally is not great, not terrible. Keep in mind, it is an 18-team league, so you see 13 is just the bottom third. And if you see 9th, you're middle of the pack, right? And if you see T5, then you're like the upper third of the league. So they're fine for what they do. They allow a lot of hits, over 900 hits on the season they allowed. So really, I look at the matchup and I say, if Lake Erie can get some offense going against a team that does walk some guys, that does allow some hits, that will give up some runs, then we can have a little bit of an interesting series. But if we're going to say good batting is going to overcome good pitching, which is kind of the way I've leaned thus far throughout this, playoff preview bonus episode, then Schaumburg's the way we got to go. And given the season series, it looks like that's the way things are going to go. So I'm going to take Schaumburg. I'm going to take him in 2 games. I do think Lake Erie had a good year. 10 games above 500 is always a good year. But I think not winning that division is really what's going to be what does them in. And on the flip side that we have the team that did win the division in the Washington Wild, things 54-42. They're going to take on the 56-40 Gateway Grizzlies. They will host the Grizzlies. Records aside, Gateway got the wild card, so that's why they will be on the road for 2. These teams are honestly pretty evenly matched. One's 5th in ERA, one's 6th, one's 7th in WHIP, one's 5th. One's 4th in strikeouts, the other one's 13. That's a big gap. But then you go to hits, they're separated by 20. One's 6th, one's 7th. You go to walks, and then there's a bit of a gap there. Yeah, 5 versus T10, but we're talking 43 walks separating the two, which is not insignificant, but, not a chasm either. Same amount of shutouts. Slugging, they're separated by 14 points, which is enough for 3 whole positions in the offensive rankings. They're on bases separated by 3 points. Their batting average separated by 9 points. Steals are the separate there. Washington just doesn't steal bases. That's just a philosophy difference there. 51 total bases separating them. And really the gap there is when it comes to runs scored, that's about a 55 run gap. All that being said, Gateway slightly better offensively, slightly worse on pitching. I would kind of want to say Washington in a sense, because I do think that those gaps aren't enough for me to really overly factor in. However, there's something about Gateway and being prone to big innings for them. They've put up some gaudy numbers this year that I kind of feel Gateway in this one. That, of course, being said, Gateway is a very streaky team. Washington's been what they have been. And getting home field has been huge for them because they struggle very much on the road. They can't really beat that upper tier of team, that A-plus tier team. They can beat teams that are in their own tier, that kind of B tier of teams. Certainly, they can beat them on the road. We saw them beat up on Sussex on the road, and I think that's a pretty comparable team for them. But when they start getting into the Schaumburgs, the Quebecs, the Gateways of the league, the Tri-Cities of the league, that's when it becomes a bit more of a challenge for them. So, don't only have to play one on the road. Again, steal on the road, split at home, move on. Take on Schaumburg in round 2. However, if you don't steal on the road, it's not that big of a deal because you still have 2 at home. You just don't have a margin of error. And that, of course, being said, I do feel like Gateway can take game 1, and I do feel like Gateway's a good enough team to split. This is probably the most fun series out of them all. As we'll talk about in the East, those ones are more clear-cut. However, this is really the true coin flip series here. The better body of work, the better body of teams is in the Frontier League this year, in my opinion. However, the better series, I think, lie more American Association. This is the outlier series to me. Everything about the coin flip, season series with a 3-3 split as best I could tell. And I'm going to say Gateway in 3. However, that's a very shaky Gateway pick. And I may just be picking to get a different team further in the postseason. We do know this is a Gateway team that has struggled in the postseason. Versus a Washington team that went to the finals last year, missed a year, but had 2 semifinal appearances right before that, and has always done well enough in the postseason. I'm curious to see if they can get over the hump this year. They have probably one of the better matchups they could ask for, all things considered. We'll see if having to fight to make the postseason and then fight to win the division makes a difference in the end. Going to the East in the penultimate matchup that we're going to look at today, we have the Quebec Capitals sitting at a franchise best 67-29, taking on the New York Boulders at 52-40. New York coming to fight till the penultimate day of the season, penultimate twice in under a minute. Good for me. To make the postseason, these teams are pretty comparable batting-wise. Quebec, I would comfortably call the best hitting team in the league, but New York is certainly up there in the top 3 or 4. Batting average is separated by 2 points, slugging separated by 9, and then it's all relatively close from there, but slightly further out. They score about the same amount of runs, although Pomona is a little bit more hitter-friendly with the short porches, and the chasm out there in center. Pitching was where it starts to get a little bit different. Quebec is the best pitching team in the league. First or second, all the major categories, 10 shutouts on the year, a sub 3.8 on the year, a sub 1, about a 1.2 whip, which is, I believe currently the lowest among all the partner league teams. Strikeouts are about 100 plus better, and they don't really allow hits, and they don't walk anybody, less than 300 walks in a year. New York, meanwhile, is double digits for everything except for shutouts. Quebec did win the season series 5-4, though, so it's a little bit closer than you would expect. 2 of these games are going to be up in Quebec. One of them is going to be in Pomona, New York. I will be there tonight to watch that contest. I want New York to do well solely because it'd be nice to see someone break Quebec's streak. I want New York to do well because selfishly, it's baseball that is closer to me, and I get to sit in a nice air-conditioned or climate-controlled press box. However, there's 15 games separating these teams, and those 15 games aren't fugazi either. Quebec is a machine. We do this every year where they start off a little slow or they'll have a little swoon and we'll go, maybe this is the year. And then it's never the year. And then they go on a run. And then in the postseason, they'll be down for the count. They will lose their first game in a best of 3 and be trailing in the 7th of game 2 of the best of 3. And then they'll tie it up and then they'll lose the lead in the 8th and they'll walk it off in the 9th. And then they'll do the same thing the next night. This is not the kind of team that panics. And when they're playing a team that on paper they hit just as well as and pitch circles around, you're hard pressed to pick against them. I'm going to go Quebec because until they don't do it, you go Quebec. And it's really just that simple of an equation. The boys from up north are just a different beast entirely. We look at the last matchup now, and it is the Sussex County Miners sitting at 53-43, taking on the Tri-City Valley Cats that are 62-34. You would think Tri-City would be hosting that matchup there, but it is not. Sussex will get games 2 and, if necessary, 3. Game 1 up there in Joe Bruno, we mentioned earlier, tonight there. And for those in the New Jersey area, Sussex is hosting a watch party at the restaurant attached to their ballpark, should you want to go. However, we look at these two teams, same batting average, slightly better on base for Sussex, slightly better slugging for Tri-City, stolen bases comparable within 3, total bases comparable within about 30 or so there. Runs scored, again, comparable within 11 of each other. Pitching comparable, about a third of a run of each other, whips within 0.4 of each other. Strikeouts are in favor of Sussex. However, hits are certifiably in favor of Tri-City. Walks are within 5 of each other. Shutouts are within 2 of each other. Split the season series 3 apiece. However, this is a Tri-City team that's picked up steam as the year's gone on. Whereas a Sussex County team that, as we mentioned on the YouTube preview, has been very injured as of late. They don't have Maciel. They don't have Backstrom. Those are 2 of their bigger bats in the lineup. Yes, Dom Johnson's still here. Yes, Hunter D'Amato is playing very well right now. And yes, Sean Roby is definitely still here. They still do have those 3. Abdel just started doing very well. He's player of the week, so I guess that's 4 bats, so you can make something happen there. But Tri-City is kind of that non-flashy team we mentioned earlier, right? We talked towards the very end of the association preview about how it's not even a non-flashy team that's just grinding doing yeoman's work. It's just not a good team. Tri-City is the opposite of that. They are the yeoman team. They're not flashy. They do yeoman's work. They just go out, they win ball games, and they're just a machine at this point. Greg Taggart, we wrote off a little too soon, and he didn't write back. He is by far still proving that he has it. It just looks like he needed a younger group of guys, a different setting to really make it work. It looks like the association just wasn't for him anymore. The league moved in a different direction from him. But the move to the Frontier League really has worked wonders for him. And just generally looking at this group, there aren't an overwhelming amount of guys that stand out to you, but it's a deep team. They all do their job, and it results in a lot of wins. I'm going to say Tri-City in 2. I think Tri-City would have knocked out New York in 2. And I think Tri-City right now is a team nobody wants to play. I'm very, very, very interested in what a Quebec and Tri-City series would look like. That will be a total war, and one that I look very, very forward to watching unfold in front of us. So That is the preview. That is the bonus episode. That is a breakdown of each of the matchups here. If you want more on each of the individual teams, go to the Indie Ball Report YouTube channel to get a breakdown of each of the teams, the playoff formats, and the schedules for each of them. The schedules are admittedly pretty comparable. Best of 3, best of 5, best of 5, 3rd to the 6th, and then in the case of the Frontier League, it's Tuesday to Sunday for each of the next 2 rounds, and then in the case of the American, it's just Tuesday to Saturday for those leagues there, and then the brackets are just the mentions we made, and there's some predictions also in there as well, but they're worth watching should you want more content. I don't want to bore you because it's just me talking, so I think I've gone on for long enough. Follow the podcast on YouTube. That we already mentioned that, but Indie Ball Report on that. Indie Ball Report everywhere except for Twitter. That is at Indie Ball Pod. We'll be back with some thoughts on the Jackal situation as that continues to develop. We'll be back to recap each of these series, which should be through at least game 1, probably game 2 at that point. So maybe we'll have some series to wrap up, maybe some team autopsies to do as well. And of course, with any news and the wrap up on the Pioneer and Atlantic Leagues as well. But until then, don't forget to play ball.